Reckmeyer.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to share a little bit of one of my passions, which is talking about global citizenship. But more importantly than it just being interesting, is because it's really significant. Be thinking about the kinds of conversations we want to have around the dinner table, right? So people came here on a Saturday afternoon to listen to a TEDx talk, but partly it was the theme that if you go to a dinner table, you're going to have an interesting time. And people have different experiences. But it's not the food usually. Most of us are prosperous enough that we can have good meals anywhere we are. And we know the difference between an interesting or an enjoyable dinner table experience and one that's not. If it's a lot of silence, nobody's interested. If it's a lot of people yakking at each other but not paying any attention, it gets real old real fast. If it's monopolized by a few people trying to sell their thing, it gets really, really boring real fast, right? So what makes the dinner table experience really worth savoring is that you have good conversations. So the essence of it is the conversations. So I want to talk a little bit about the nature of conversations, and in particular, what it would take for somebody to be able to participate in a global dinner experience and have it be an interesting conversation. Because as Thalia said, we both think this stuff is really important. And we think that educating global citizens is significant and is arguably the most important priority for higher education. So the nature of the conversations depend upon the nature of the people, but not just people who can talk, but people who can express opinions, are informed about what's going on, who care about what matters, and are willing to engage in dialogue with other people, not just talk past them, not just impress people. So I've been very, very fortunate to have a lot of different kinds of experiences, and I want to start off with one of the ones where it epitomizes the nature of conversations and dinner table experiences. About 20 years ago, I was fortunate enough to be invited to be a fellow at the Salzburg Global Seminar. This is in Austria. It's held in the castle in The Sound of Music. And this is one glorious week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending upon your experiences, where in fact you have ongoing dinner table conversations, breakfast table conversations, lunch table conversations, beer stube conversations, conversations on the terrace outside at 2:30 in the morning, looking at the lake where Marie and the kids fell in the water. But the conversations are distinctive in two ways. First of all, they're about important, pressing concerns. It's important to recognize that keeping up with the world is more important than keeping up with the Kardashians. Okay? The second part of it is you're having conversations with people from around the world who are really interested in hearing from each other, having different points of view, and often have profoundly different experiences and different perspectives on issues that might be in common. And they could be water issues, they could be energy issues, they could be poverty issues, they could be living in natural disaster zones, all kinds of experiences. But you're having cross-cultural dialogues in a safe place where it's really about conversation. And I was very, very fortunate to be involved in this. I've been invited back multiple times since then. And since 2004, I've been the faculty chair for a new program on global citizenship that I chair. And people can come in from all over the world, mostly higher educational institutions, and explore global issues with some world-class speakers from the U.S. Supreme Court and South African Supreme Court, and Secretary General of OPEC and places, people like that. But the key element is people who are knowledgeable about what's going on and engage in conversation about that. Now, we can't always duplicate that kind of intensive experience with people all over the world, even with the use of modern media, even with FaceTime and Skype and everything else. It still requires people around the table or some other kind of setting where you have personal interactions. So I only have 3 major points that I want to share with you in terms of why this stuff is important. And then I'll have a couple of closing comments. And the first one is that you need to understand that we live in a global world these days. And this is not just globalization. It's not just the increasing interconnectedness of everything economic. It's certainly not the Americanization of the world. But we are much more interconnected in lots of different ways that cut across national boundaries, that cut across personal groups, tribal affiliations, organizational lines. We are just hyper-connected. And the world is becoming increasingly complex, and therefore it is having impact on people in different ways. We don't always stop to consider what those impacts are, especially since the United States has such a heavy footprint. Okay? A lot of benefits to living in a global world, a lot of downsides to living in a global world. But what's clear is that change is significant, it's tumultuous, it's having repercussions on people in lots of unintended ways, and you have all these different discussions and perspectives on globalization. Some people, like Thomas Friedman, think globalization and living in a global world is absolutely wonderful, and everything is rosy, living in a flat world. Others, like Joseph Stiglitz, who said, wait a minute, it's not so rosy. It's having all kinds of adverse consequences in terms of people. Neither one of them are completely right. If you take a judicious look at the impact of living in a global world, there are significant benefits. There are also significant downsides. Okay? And what's critical is that the world is changing profoundly. This is a very different kind of world than it was when I was growing up in the 60s. And it's going to change even more so for coming generations in the next 30 or 40 years. Because the increasing interconnections give rise to all of the kinds of emergent properties, emergent successes, technologies, new ideas, people moving. Everything's more mobile. And sometimes it evolves in ways that are not predictable for what we'd expect, and often occur in ways that are unintended from what we were trying to do. Positive aspects to technology. Facebook, for example, connects us all. And the problem is, it connects us all. Right? And you really want to share everything with everybody. Okay? So we think it's critical that people have a pretty good understanding of what's happening in this global world, and that we're at a turning point. And what's the most important characteristic of it is, in terms of these changing realities, we no longer have a clear sense of what the rules are to succeed. In large part because conditions are changing, but also because the players are changing. And it used to be that governments would generally dictate or decide the framework for how people interacted. That is no longer the case. It's governments and it's organizations, and it's not just corporate organizations, it's non-governmental organizations, and transgovernmental or intergovernmental organizations, and it's rogue groups like Al-Qaeda, and it's wealthy individuals like Bill Gates. So there's many more voices saying, we want to help make the rules. And so we're trying to figure out what to do. Now, why does this matter? Because global citizens, people who can contribute to a dinner table conversation, need to be addressing some of these very serious concerns. And I can give you a whole litany of them. It's not just the engineering councils that come up with major great challenges. If you take a look at the national security establishment, they've identified 1,400 major critical threats facing the United States. That's like trying to drink from a fire hydrant. And how can you figure out where the priorities are? So you're going to worry about poverty here? How much are you going to worry about poverty? What about cyber terrorism? What about water issues? What about energy shortages? There are two major meta challenges facing the planet that you ought to at least pay attention to if you're a global citizen. Okay? So the first one is, we are using resources at a rate that's exceeding the capacity of the planet to replenish them. We're running out of room, we're running out of resources, okay? And the best estimate is that if everybody in the world, roughly about 7 billion now, lived in a lower middle class existence, not what's typical in Silicon Valley, okay? But a lower middle class existence, it would take somewhere between 3 to 7 Earths to support those people. The second is, there's a growing gap between the haves and the have-nots, and especially the have-lots. And even here in Silicon Valley, the have-nots are doing better than most of the have-lots in many other parts of the world. Right? So if you sit there and you try to figure out what's happening, you have to pay attention to the fact that on the one hand, we have got to significantly figure out how to address the real needs and interests of 7 billion people, because we're all in this together, and at the same time, finding out that they've had very uneven results. So while there's been significant absolute improvement for more people are living better lives on both a total basis and on a per capita basis than any time in human history, by orders of magnitude. We also know that the level of prosperity in any of the advanced countries is inversely proportional to the degree of the gap between the very wealthy and the very poor. The United States has the lowest level of success or prosperity of any advanced country in the world when you follow multiple factors. And it's because we have the highest gaps. So there's hard data that supports the fact that we've got to really rethink how we're addressing these issues, and that people need to be informed about them. So one of my passions is, especially since I got involved with the Salzburg Global Seminar, is how do we develop people who are better global citizens? People who are both informed about what's going on and engaged in trying to build a better world. It's not just an intellectual exercise. It's not just a course you take in school. It's changing your lives. So the essence of a global citizen is people who have the knowledge and the skills and the attitudes and the values and the networks, okay, to be able to live in this world and to work in this world. It is okay to do good and make money. It's good for you, it's good for your kids, but it's good for others too. So the question is, how do we do it? And the difficulty is that most of modern higher education, to build on some of the points that Thalia made, is that we're creating more and more people who are part smart and whole stupid. They know an awful lot about this particular little subject area, and they have no clue what's going on with anything else. So the essence of a global citizen is somebody who can sit down at a dinner table and have a conversation with you about a particular topic and can adjust depending on what other people bring up. In other words, they don't just understand water issues or poverty issues or music or art or communications or topic, but they have some sense of the big picture. Not that any of us are experts in everything, but we have all these random acts of globalization that go on our campuses and in our societies. And we need people spending a little more time connecting the dots and being able to understand that there's significant connections between different issues such as water and energy and national security and poverty and immigration and healthcare. And that if you start trying to tug on one of them and make improvements in that area, it can lead to problems in other areas that are worse than the original conditions. So you have unintended adverse consequences even when people are trying to do well. If you go back, my mother would be happy to say that I remember some of the stuff in the Bible. Remember the whole notion that the road to hell is paved with good intentions? The reason it's paved with good intentions and is leading in the wrong place is because we don't have a good sense of the big picture. Now, scientists would talk about this as a tragedy of the commons, is that we pursue our own enlightened self-interest from our own particular perspectives, whether it be our nationalities or our gender or our economics or our country or whatever we do, where we work, how we live, rather than looking and realizing we're all on this one big planet together. And if we don't figure out how to do better at working together in pursuit of shared common goals to build a better world, we're in deep trouble. So I'll leave you with a metaphor that I think captures this, and then a couple of points of where you might go from here. There's an African proverb that I heard from one of my colleagues in Salzburg. The essence of it is that when the watering hole starts drying up, the animals look at each other differently. And I would put to you that the watering hole is drying up, both metaphorically and literally on this planet. And so this is no longer an academic exercise. It's really become an imperative. We have got to educate people through higher education and beyond higher education and how to be better global citizens. That doesn't mean everybody has to go out and save Ethiopia from famine. But it does mean we have to be aware of how interconnected we are, and the issues that play out in one part of the world can be profoundly different in terms of how they play out elsewhere, and we have to figure out how to help each other. And if we don't do that, we are in a heap of trouble. Now, it probably won't come to a head in my lifetime, but I got kids, and we're hoping to have grandkids. And we realize that it really does matter. So our goal would be, my goal in particular, is I think we need to transform higher education. So we want to keep encouraging students to major in whatever topics they find significant to them, okay? But we ought to be preparing everybody who graduates from college to be a global citizen. We need people from all walks of life, from all interests, pursuing all different kinds of careers, but you have got to figure out where you fit into the bigger picture. So you might want to take a look, if you're interested in these topics more. You can talk about our SJSU Salzburg program here at San Jose State, where we've been doing some interesting things and won some awards. You can take a look at the Salzburg Global Seminar, in particular the Global Citizenship Program. But given the dinner table theme, I thought I would close with suggesting you might want to take a look at a video that's available on YouTube, and I heard it just came out on DVD. It goes back about 20 plus years. It's called Mind Walk. And this is a day-long conversation between a poet, a physicist, and a politician wandering around Mont Saint-Michel, talking about the importance of global issues, the imperative of trying to improve them, and the need for systems thinking. And given that I'm a systems scientist and looked at interconnections, I think it's absolutely crucial that any solutions we develop in terms of building the global world have to be multidisciplinary, have to incorporate perspectives from people from lots of different walks of life, from lots of different professional backgrounds, from lots of different parts of the world, or else we're in a heap of trouble as a species. Thank you.